hour. NPR News is 91.1 FM KNOW, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Stream us online, nprnews.org. A chance of rain after midnight tonight in the metro. Cloudy skies and temperatures dropping to the upper 40s.
NPR News. Have you waited in an airport security line for hours recently? It may be because TSA officers at your local airport have been calling in sick. They've been going without pay for about a month as a government shutdown in Washington, D.C. drags on. That's leading to long lines, burned out workers, and frustrated travelers. In the meantime, ICE officers have been deployed to help out. My guest tonight has worked in aviation security for 30 years and can tell us what this all means for air travel and safety. And I hope you'll join our conversation. Have you recently flown and noticed any changes at TSA checkpoints? What's your reaction to ICE agents helping screen travelers? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. That's coming up after these headlines.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Ryland Barton. Gulf Arab countries did not want the U.S. to launch a war on Iran, and they're facing some of Iran's heaviest missile and drone attacks. Now they're worried that the war could end with the entire region less secure than when fighting began, as NPR's Greg Myrie explains.
We are talking about a half dozen countries, and they all have their own perspectives, of course. But broadly speaking, they're very nervous about how this war might end. I spoke with Hussein Ibish at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE have developed real concerns about the prospect that Donald Trump could say, you know what, it's over, that's it, we won, declare victory and walk away. Iran would end up weakened but radicalized.
So the Gulf countries want to come out of this war with guarantees that Iran can't threaten them.
NPR's Greg Myrie reporting. Iran's refusal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz is intensifying concerns about global energy supplies and what that could mean for food prices in the U.S. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports outside of higher fuel costs, economists say consumers may soon see higher prices on certain grocery items.
Higher fuel and fertilizer costs are expected to ripple through the food supply chain, but not all at once. David Ortega is an economist at Michigan State University. He says energy prices are one of the biggest drivers, especially when it comes to transportation.
So where we're going to first start to see this show up are on the perishable food items. So think specialty produce, dairy products, meat products that have to be refrigerated. So refrigerated trucking uses up a lot more energy.
Ortega says there's often a lag of several months between rising input costs and higher prices at the grocery store, meaning shoppers may not feel the full impact until later this year. Windsor Johnston, NPR News.
In Los Angeles, a jury has found Meta and Google liable in a case that brought by a 20-year-old woman. She accused the companies of contributing to her addiction to the social media sites. Steve Futterman reports.
On the 9th day of deliberations, the jury found that Meta and Google were both negligent, that both knew of the potential dangers of their apps, especially when it came to young people, and failed to take sufficient action or warn users. The jurors awarded the 20-year-old woman a total of $6 million. Her attorney, Mark Lanier, admitted that he thought the damages would be higher, but still called it a significant ruling.
This is a landmark moment. It will reverberate. I'll tell you this, if the jury had returned a no, the champagne corks would be popping in the boardrooms of Google and Meta.
Many similar lawsuits have already been filed against social media companies, and legal experts predict the verdict is likely to trigger many more. For NPR News, I'm Steve Futterman in Los Angeles.
This is NPR News from Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Pew Charitable Trusts, sharing about the state of housing in America on the After the Fact podcast, available at pewtrusts.org/afterthefact, and the Doris Duke Foundation.
For NPR News in the Twin Cities, I'm Elena C. Police in Brooklyn Park say they are overwhelmed by 911 calls coming from the city's many group homes. Ellie Roth has more.
Brooklyn Park has some 300 group homes for people with mental, cognitive, or physical disabilities. That's more than any other city in the state. Police say those properties are responsible for around 10% of all their 911 calls. An NPR News and APM Reports investigation found that since late 2022, at least 12 group home residents have died in Brooklyn Park. In 3 of those cases, the state found that maltreatment by the group home contributed to the death. Brooklyn Park and many of its neighboring cities are asking the legislature to help slow the expansion of the group home industry. Last fiscal year, the state paid out more than $500 million to companies licensed to operate group homes in Brooklyn Park. That's up from a bit over $300 million in 2020. I'm Ellie Roth in Brooklyn Park.
The Minneapolis City Council is set to vote tomorrow on spending $5.5 million to buy property for a new police and emergency responder training center. The money would come from other parts of the city budget, including traffic safety and animal control. Supporters say first responders need the improved training site, but several city council members pushed back at a meeting yesterday. Councilmember Robin Wansley said she'd rather use existing training sites and put the money toward other projects.
This is not a need, and this is one that could be fulfilled through other interim solutions that's already in existence in our communities. We could be doing so many more things, and that's the conversation that I want to have.
City staff say the project would cost about $38 million in total. For the 5th consecutive time, the EPA has granted a waiver allowing year-round sales of E15, a blend of corn-based ethanol and gasoline. The move comes amid rising fuel prices due to the war in Iran. E15 usually can't be sold during the summer in much of the U.S. because it evaporates quickly, increasing smog risk. Minnesota is one of the few states that allows year-round sales. This is NPR News.
This hour on NPR News is supported by Alight and Northwest Minnesota Foundation, organizations committed to the people and communities of Minnesota. Their support helps make space for respectful conversation, shared understanding, and connection at a moment when many are seeking clarity and perspective. Now, let's begin.
Good evening. I'm Catharine Richert. You're listening to NPR News. Being at the airport can be frustrating even on a good day when you sail through security and your flight is on time. But in the last few weeks, images of travelers in security lines that snake out the door have made headlines. Some airports are advising passengers to arrive hours and hours before their flight boards. And that's all in time for spring break. Behind this vexing problem is an impasse in Washington, D.C., where a government shutdown drags on. TSA workers aren't getting paid, and many are calling in sick as a result. And in the meantime, ICE officers have been deployed to some of the most hard-hit airports, raising questions about what they're doing there and why they're getting a paycheck while TSA workers aren't. We'll get into all of this with my guest tonight, who has worked in aviation security for 30 years and can tell us what it all means for air travel and safety. And I hope you'll join our conversation. Have you recently flown and noticed any changes at TSA checkpoints? What's your reaction to ICE agents helping screen travelers at airports? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Or if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can leave us a comment or a question and we'll talk about it on the air. Now I want to bring in our guest. Sheldon H. Jacobson is a professor of computer science at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He is a data scientist who's worked on aviation security for 30 years. He also helped develop the TSA PreCheck program. He joins us tonight from Urbana, Illinois. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Jacobson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight.
So I want to start out by just kind of getting your take on some really wildly different stories we've been hearing. We know that the wait at Minneapolis-St. Paul right now to get through security is 10 or 20 minutes long. That's of this morning. As someone who flies with, some frequency, I feel like that's a pretty good deal if you're going through security at MSP. The other day in Houston and in Atlanta, we were looking at, 4-hour long waits. Why is it so bad in some places and not so bad in other places right now?
It all depends on the number of TSA officers that show up. If the normal number show up, then operations are business as usual. If, on the other hand, you have enough people who are calling in sick, taking vacation days, whatever it may be, then you're going to have this surge of waiting, which in many ways, when they report it in the traditional media, they talk about the worst case scenario. So we've seen
Right.
4-hour delays in Houston Intercontinental, but that's the worst situation. It doesn't mean the average person is experiencing 4 hours. It means in the worst time period during that day, it happened at an airport. So you have to put this in context, keeping that in mind.
Okay, so you said that a lot of workers are calling in sick, maybe taking vacation time. Is that happening across the board? I mean, how many absences are we actually seeing right now?
Well, it's very hard to tell because every day has become an adventure in air travel because of airport security variations. The thing to keep in mind is that and I'll use MSP as a good example, a few days before you're going to fly, data is downloaded. So the TSA knows what to expect for that day. As a result of that, they also know how many security lanes that they're going to have to operate. The challenge, of course, is will they have the personnel on that day? So we don't know what's going to happen on any given day. And that's why you have these wildly variable situations across the country. Some airports doing normal business as usual, other airports highly irregular. And literally, the TSA knows if you're going to have a good day or a bad day because they have an idea of how many people will be traveling out of their airport on any given day. And when people show up, or more significantly don't show up for that day, they may have to reduce the number of security lanes that are being operated at that airport. That means that it's simply a supply and demand. If you need 12 lanes open at a large hub airport, but you only have personnel for 10, that difference of 2 is the difference between waiting potentially 5 or 10 minutes or waiting 2 hours. It's so fragile.
And so when we see those really long lines, is that an issue of just a lot of TSA workers calling in sick on that particular day? Or is it more of an issue of how those TSA workers who are showing up are being deployed most efficiently? Or is it some combination of both?
The TSA has very, very well-defined standard protocols for manning airport security checkpoints, as well as screening checked baggage. Everything is very carefully orchestrated in their manuals. They're also cross-trained, so that means that they can do just about any job on the footprint of an airport security checkpoint. As a result of that, they know what they need in terms of personnel. The question is, do they have that personnel to man the lanes? Because there's a connection between the number of people who are available and the number of lanes they can open. And if they don't have enough people, you say, well, maybe we'll just take 1 or 2 people off and operate it with less people. Then it will compromise security, and security is non-negotiable. It's non-negotiable. That's why people are concerned. Is this going to lead to a less secure air system? Not at all. As long as they follow the protocols, which means manning each of the lanes in the concourses at the terminals appropriately, that will not be an issue. The bigger issue is getting people through in a timely manner. And at some airports, like we've seen at MSP, like you said, business as usual. Then you get down to Atlanta, you get down to Houston, you've had tremendous problems. And it's just a question of how many people show up.
Right. And are some airports more vulnerable to some of these staffing issues than others? We're just talking about really big ones right now, but is it easier at bigger ones or is it easier at small ones to manage absences?
Well, they all follow the same protocols. The difference between a large hub airport versus a very small regional airport is that the small regional airport doesn't have as many lanes, which means they have less staff. But that means they're also more vulnerable that if enough people don't show up, it's not that people would be delayed. They just couldn't operate the security lane. And that means they have to shut that down. And if you don't have the security lane operating, you have to close the airport for that day. So small airports are subject to shutdown. Large airports are subject to slowdowns.
If you're just tuning in, we're talking with an aviation security expert about those long TSA lines at airports around the country. We want to know if you've recently flown and noticed any changes at TSA checkpoints. And we also want to know what your reaction is to ICE agents helping out at airport security. Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Or if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can leave us a comment and we will respond on the air. Now, Sheldon, you have been studying this for your career. How do you feel about flying right now in general?
Once again, it's so hit or miss, but it's mostly fine. That's the thing to keep in mind. The TSA officers want to get paid, and they should be paid, and they're being held hostage by these lawmakers. But really, it's the traveling public that's being held hostage. That's the point. There's no reason why this should be even happening and occurring. The question, though, is if they decided to quit, then they're not going to get paid. And if they decide to not show up, they may get paid depending on how they're taking their time off. So ultimately, at the end of the day, they're all going to get paid. And that is a tremendous incentive for them to keep showing up because they know there's going to be a paycheck at the end of this shutdown.
Right. Now, President Trump has said that all of this could actually lead to the closure of smaller airports. But as you just said, the smaller ones might actually have an easier time with some of those staffing deficiencies. And we've seen like those longer lines at larger airports. I mean, what do you make of that prediction from the president?
Well, the president makes a lot of statements, and that doesn't mean they're based in reality. He doesn't have any experience with this, and I'm not sure if he really listens to his advisors. So as a result of that, I discount anything that he says, in particular in an area that I am comfortable and familiar with. So what he says about airport security is kind of irrelevant. What's really happening, boots on the ground, what's really happening with the people. The TSA officers are a dedicated group. They go through several weeks, months of training before they even touch an airport. These are professionals, and they're I wouldn't say they're paid a great deal, but they're paid a reasonable salary for their work, and they have a tremendous responsibility, and they take pride in what they're doing. They take pride in what they're doing. I think that's an important part. So they're still human beings, and they still need to put food on their table. They still need to pay their bills, and there's no reason why this should be continuing. This clearly rests in the hands of the lawmakers who are unwilling to find a way to pay them. And they're inching towards a resolution, and I think a resolution will come at some point, but I don't know if that's going to be days, weeks, or potentially months. At some point, there is a breaking point, though. For example, there's been reports of 400 TSA officers have left the force, and over the last 5 weeks. Well, the fact is they typically have an 8% attrition rate for a 50,000 person force, and that's around 4,000 people per year will turn over. That's normal. That's around 330 people per month. 400 over 5 weeks is normal. So the reports that they're leaving because of the shutdown have no basis in reality. That people will just leave for whatever reason.
Right. I want to talk a little bit more about, just burnout in general. And I think we should remind the audience, too, that we've kind of lived this story a few times in recent history with TSA and government shutdowns. That must be really hard on these workers. And as someone who's seen really bad behavior from passengers in these security lines, too, I can understand why maybe it's a job that you have to have a lot of patience for, and you have to have, resistance against burnout, right? Are you concerned about how TSA officers are under strain right now, with not having some of their coworkers show up, and also just the regular strain of doing a job that can have odd hours and whiny passengers coming through?
Well, that's going to always be true. That's always the case. And they are prepared for this because it's part of their training. And they always act professionally. And there's also a hierarchy within the TSA force so that if someone who is just more entry level is there, they always can turn to a more experienced person, to a supervisor. All these things are in place. The system works amazingly well, and the people work together as a unit. That's the thing to keep in mind. They're working together as a unit. They're cross-trained, so the person who is helping you get into the advanced imaging technology or the full body scanner could easily be looking at the screen for the CT scanner for your carry-on baggage or checked baggage. They all know what each other is doing. They understand that. So we want to keep that in mind, that it's just not a group of people or haphazardly put together. This is a well-functioning unit, and they do a yeoman's effort in delivering security and safety to the traveling public. And just like I say, air traffic controllers are the unsung heroes of air travel, the TSA operators are the unsung hero of air travel.
Is TSA having a hard time recruiting new employees these days? Are there recruitment efforts out there to get more TSA agents trained in?
Well, they're constantly recruiting because with an 8% turnover, they know they have to replace people who are just going to choose to leave for whatever reason. Some of them have been there for 20 years, and some, literally have been there for 20 days. You have a whole gamut, and there's always going to be some turnover. So recruitment is important, but then once you have the recruitment, then there's the training, and the training takes several weeks into months because there's a standard that has to be met. It's not like you're going to get close to it. You have to meet the standard, and if you can't meet the standard, you're not going to be a TSA officer.
Well, speaking of training, ICE officers have been deployed to some airports around the country. What do we know about what they're doing and whether their presence is actually helping?
Well, I don't think it is helping, and on a variety of fronts. For one thing, they are not trained to be part of the TSA team. They are trained to do ICE stuff, whatever ICE stuff is. And people in Minnesota and Minneapolis in particular know a lot about that, certainly. I was interested to see the pictures of them at the airport, and they're dressed as ICE officers. They're dressed with firearms. If you notice, TSA officers are not law enforcement. They don't carry firearms. If they detect a firearm, for example, in a carry-on bag, there are law enforcement officers based at every airport who comes over and deals with it. The TSA are not law enforcement. They are not police, while the ICE officers are a form of police. So you have a mismatch right there. They aren't trained to do anything useful. And if you try to insert them into the system, what you're ultimately going to do is disrupt the unit and make it less effective and less efficient. So I don't think they have a place. The only place I can see them being stationed are at the exit doors when people are leaving the secure part of the airport and leaving the airport to go home. That's one place because the doors are automatic. They don't have to do anything or just stand there and make sure nobody comes back through it. Besides that, I don't see anything useful in what they're doing. Plus, the fact that they're dressed differently, and a lot of the time they have nothing to do because they happen to be at an airport on a day that there are plenty of TSA staff, they have that critical mass of people and all the lanes are functioning and people are getting through in 5 or 10 minutes, then they have nothing to do except collect a paycheck. And that can be demoralizing to the TSA officers.
Yeah. If you're just joining our conversation, we're talking about aviation security with an aviation security expert about those long TSA lines that we've been seeing at airports. We want to know if you've recently flown and noticed any changes at TSA. What is your reaction to ICE agents helping out in airport security? And what questions do you have about the inner workings of TSA? And do you have any tips for getting through security efficiently? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. And as always, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can leave a comment and we will respond on the air. So staying with the ICE deployment for a minute, have we ever had to do anything like this before in previous shutdowns or situations where TSA personnel was really strapped?
I don't recall anything like this of having ICE officers being deployed. The other thing that this indicates is that if the ICE officers are so essential for doing immigration control, then why are they being deployed to do something different from immigration control? So that begs the question, do we have too many ICE?
Or demoralization among the TSA staff right now?
The money exists within DHS. They just have to reallocate it. And some of the lawmakers are open to doing this. I think there are some sensible lawmakers who realize that this solution is to pay the TSA officers and that this situation really can't go on because at some point there is a breaking point. If we start to see instead of 300 or 350 TSA officers resigning in a month and it moves up to 1,000 or 1,500, that will become a crisis because you can't retrain people quick enough. And then the effect of the slowdown will actually go many, many months beyond. Even if everyone's paid, that you don't have enough people who are trained, and that becomes a crisis. We don't want to reach that point. That's why it's so critical. Pay the TSA officers.
Right. Because if a bunch of people leave, then there's a bottleneck as you train new people in, or you recruit new people in. I mean, that could take months and months and months, and it could really stall out the entire system, I can imagine.
That could take months. Exactly. That is the challenge. We don't want to get to that point. And I think for the most part, people are sensitive to this. We are not in a crisis right now. At any given day, at any given airport, it may seem like a crisis, but we're not at a crisis. But we can approach one at some point in the future. And I don't know what that future is yet. I kind of watch it on a daily basis to see what I can glean from the situation. But for the most part, the system is operating amazingly well in spite of the strain that is being placed on the TSA officers.
I mean, I think people think of TSA or think of the security lines as sort of a thing you have to do before you can go on your vacation. I know I dread it personally every single time. But say a little bit more about how the places where this is really apparent and it's led to these long lines. What security concerns would someone like you have when there are just so many people trying to get through? Does it make you worry that maybe some of those protocols will be breezed through, something could get through that shouldn't get through and could lead to a really tragic incident?
Well, that's why we're having these massive delays at some airports when the staffing problems exist. Because if the TSA officers said, oh, we're going to slack on security, we're not going to man as many people in security lanes, and then they're creating the potential for a security breach, then we want to worry. But the fact is, because of these long delays occasionally occurring at some airports on some days, that's a sign that security is still stable. Security is still in place. It's if we see with a smaller staff that people are getting through in normal time, that's when you start to worry.
If you're just tuning in, we're talking with an aviation security expert about long lines at the airport. And we want to know if you've flown recently, if you've noticed any changes at TSA checkpoints, what's been your experience? We also want to know what your reaction is to ICE agents helping out in airport security and what you make of those federal funding freezes that are leading to TSA agents not getting paid right now. Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can leave us a comment and we will respond on the air. So I feel like TSA has just changed a lot in my lifetime. I was, 21 years old when 9/11 happened. And suddenly, we were taking our shoes off. We were pulling our liquids out. Now, when I go to MSP, I don't have to do either of those things. I know the shoe rule has changed, but MSP has these machines that don't require you to take out your liquids, which of course makes things more efficient. How do you think this is all working, especially in the last 2 decades when so many more restrictions were put around what could be taken on airplanes?
Well, the TSA, although we see the most front activities are at airports, airport security is just the last mile of aviation security. Aviation security is a layered system that covers the entire national airspace. There are people who are looking at protocols and understanding the risks and then determining what technologies are appropriate to mitigate these risks. There are people on air marshals on flights, which nobody ever notices, but they're there to protect on high-risk flights. There's so many layers in place. This is the foundation of risk-based security. This is why the system works as well as it does. So the system is designed to respond to perceived and actual threats. And when we had a threat, for example, the shoe bomber, which occurred 20 years ago now, the thought was, okay, now we ought to take off our shoes. And then over time, that requirement has been relaxed. The technologies have improved, so it's no longer necessary to have that. The one that people often discuss is the liquid requirement, the 311 bag, the 3-ounce limit. Do we really need that anymore? And the fact is that the CT scanners that have been deployed at airports are designed to detect liquid explosives. However, they haven't quite reached the performance level that warrants relaxing the 3 ounces and maybe going to 12 ounces or whatever it is. So people, well, we've gotten used to things. It's very easy to tighten security. It's very, very hard to relax it, because if something then happens after you relax it, the question is, look what happened, look what you did. So nobody wants to take that responsibility.
But as we maybe ease, or at least some airports are able to allow people to not have to take out their liquids, for instance. It feels like there's a bit of a patchwork of what the rules are around the country. I mean, is that okay? Or is it just a matter of some airports catching up with the most advanced technology?
Well, it depends on what's been deployed at the airport. The larger airports, the hub airports like MSP, like Houston, Newark, and New York airports, they have the state-of-the-art technology. The smaller regional airports, they may not have them deployed yet. The other thing, of course, is facial recognition, which has been in the news quite a bit because of ICE activities. And facial recognition at airports is simply about authenticating your identity. And it adds a layer of security that doesn't seem very great to the average person. But when you look under the covers, you realize how important it is, because if we know who you are with great certainty, then we can actually trust you more. And that is why aviation security is something that is certainly going to be affected with having facial recognition a key component of that.
Yes, we should watch for that. Okay, we have Eric in Minneapolis on the line. Eric, what do you want to share with us?
I'm wondering if your guest has heard anything about this. I just saw a post today that it's a goal of Project 2025 to privatize TSA. And all the things you're just talking about kind of fold into what we're seeing, the push from this administration to create a security state, and maybe privatizing TSA might be part of that.
Okay, thank you so much, Eric. I mean, has there been any talk of that, Sheldon?
Absolutely. But people have to separate aviation security from airport security. What goes on at an airport, like I said, is the last mile, the final step in aviation security. And privatizing that is fine. But the TSA is committed to aviation security, which means the whole system. They set the policies, the strategies, they determine what technologies need to be purchased, what the capabilities of those technologies are, how they would be deployed and used and trained. That's very different from what goes on at an airport. Airport does some of that, but they don't set the policies. So the privatization of airport security, what goes on at the airports is fine, but the TSA still has to set the protocols and the strategies and the policies. That should not be privatized. So the TSA needs to exist, but it has to exist in a different form than what we know today.
We have Michelle in Minneapolis on the line. Michelle, what do you want to share with us?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I worked for the federal government for over 30 years, and I think TSA employees should be insulted at the fact that they are seeing the ICE agents wandering around in the airport doing absolutely nothing. They are just sightseeing and getting paid for it. I also agree with the man that just called about privatization. The Postal Service, they were thinking about doing the same thing, but it is so big, and if they did that, nobody would get mail. They wouldn't know where their mail was. And the same thing with TSA. You don't know who's checking you out. Maybe it's a friend that says, oh, just go through or whatever. You have to have government involved, or you have to have some type, like your guest says, that you can trust each other and you take pride in your job. That's what it's all about. Thank you.
Yeah, and Michelle raises a good point, Sheldon, which is, if there was a move to privatize some of these jobs, which it sounds like you are, confident isn't really happening, but you would lose maybe a degree of control over how these systems work. Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Well, once again, the TSA has to set the strategies and the policies that the private contractors who are delivering airport security, like at San Francisco International, like Kansas City International, they have a standard to meet, and they are trained to meet that standard. And if they fail it, then they lose the contract. So there's a tremendous incentive to continue to operate. Plus, they are checked and rechecked and checked again to ensure they're meeting the standards. So once again, there's such an important difference between setting the policy strategies and determining the equipment and then delivering the final product. And the final product can be delivered by contractors in the private sector. But you don't want the TSA to go away because someone has to set the national standard for what the airports are executing.
Aiden in Minneapolis is on the line. Aiden, what do you want to share?
Hi, I flew in from Atlanta today to Minneapolis, and I just wanted to let you know the security time there was about 20 minutes for me, and that was around 9 in the morning. And there were no ICE officers in the Atlanta airport. The Atlanta mayor has deployed the Atlanta City Police Department instead of ICE.
Oh, that's interesting. Aiden, I mean, what time did you get to the airport to make your flight?
My flight was at 4 p.m., and my group arrived at about 9 a.m.
Okay, so you had a nice long day at Atlanta Hartfield. Okay, that sounds, I mean, I'm sure you had a good time just browsing the bookstore and that kind of thing, or watch some TV. I mean, those stories are pretty familiar. I had a friend fly from LaGuardia to Minneapolis today, Sheldon, and she was saying, like, I'm going to get there like 4 or 5 hours early. She said she got there. It was the fastest that she'd ever gotten through security. So it does feel like it's really hit or miss. People are only seeing these crazy long lines. I mean, do we know anything about what time of day it might be worse relative to others? Or is it really just day by day and hour by hour?
It's day by day and airport by airport. But once the day begins, if they're short of staff, then there's going to be problems probably for many hours in that day. Mm-hmm. But then the following day, the staffing level is up 20%, people show up, and you're getting through in 10 minutes. So it really is hit or miss by the day, depending on how many people show up. And the key number is how many people. They are cross-trained. They can do any job within the TSA security footprint. It's just a question of having the number of people there.
Let's see. We have Margot now in Burnsville. Margot, what do you want to share?
Hi. I just wanted to respond to the request to hear from people who have traveled recently. I traveled over the last 2 weeks, just got back here on the 21st to the Caribbean and back. In the Minneapolis airport, Minneapolis-St. Paul airport, it was a spring break weekend, everybody leaving. It was really, really packed. I travel a lot, I want to say, and I did not detect that there was any problem with TSA getting us through in an efficient time, given the number of people that there were on Saturday morning when I left a week ago Saturday, this past Saturday. Yeah. So it was the 7th through the 21st I traveled.
Yeah, okay,
and
so just around this time.
That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, spring break is a really busy travel time. I was traveling at the start of spring break just a couple of weeks ago and got to the airport and was shocked by how long the lines are. But, we use Clear, Sheldon, which is like TSA. I mean, let's talk a little bit about some of these new products that are out there. And, of course, TSA PreCheck, which you helped create. Can you tell us more about why that was created and, like, what it is, who it's meant for?
Well, TSA PreCheck is the poster child of risk-based security, aligning risk and resources, basically. Because if you have someone who is exceedingly risk-free, there's no need to subject them to excessive screening. And risk-based security tries to determine the level of risk and the level of screening that's required. So, for example, when you go through the vetting process for PreCheck, you're going to be asked some questions, you're going to have your fingerprints taken, and these biometric information is going to be valuable because by you voluntarily providing that information, the TSA knows a little bit about you. Most importantly, it knows you're not trying to hide anything. And that enables you to be subject to what is called expedited screening through a TSA PreCheck lane. You don't have to disrobe a light coat. You don't have to take your shoes off, but that's true also in regular lanes now. But you don't have to take items out of your carry-on bag. It's much more convenient. You go through a metal detector as opposed to a full-body scanner. You may be randomly selected for a full-body scanner, but most people don't. So it's much quicker. Now, so Pre-check is great for the small cost that it is. If you travel 2 or 3 times a year, it's worth the price. Now, what is Clear? Clear is a private company, and they use biometrics. And what they do is they affirm that you are who you are. So it's identity authentication, much like how the TSA does it also. But then you get to be put in the front of the TSA pre-check line, because if you don't have pre-check, then if you're going to have Clear and not pre-check, it makes no sense. So as a result, you want both of them. And then you discover you're at the front of the line. So it's a way to actually bump ahead of everybody. So you're paying for that privilege.
So let me ask you this. If let's back up a little bit. I mean, do you feel like that biometric data that TSA PreCheck, for instance, requires is good at predicting who will be a suspected threat to aviation security and who won't? And if so, why aren't we just doing that across the board anyway with everyone who's flying?
Well, I've advocated that everybody who is willing to provide that information be given pre-check at no cost, because the information that we voluntarily provide, and it's fairly benign information, but it is information, enables the TSA then to subject you to less physical screening. So it's a trade-off. If you're willing to have a little bit of your privacy given up, you then will have less physical privacy intruded upon. What is it you're willing to take? I've had pre-check since it began, and I do have to pay for it, by the way, just to let you know. And as a result
Even
of
though
that,
you helped create the system, they don't give you a coupon or anything?
No, I have to pay for it as well, just like everybody else. So the point being is that if you have it, then that little bit that is known about you, it's not so much that they know that you're safe, they know that you're not as risky. And that's the thing. Nobody is 100% safe, but how much risk is there? And that incremental drop in risk is sufficient for them to subject you to less physical screening. So, and it may seem, well, that doesn't seem like a big deal. It's a tremendous big deal. And once again, this is monitored very, very carefully, because every time you go through a checkpoint, if you're in the pre-check lane, then they're observing you. And if you're not in a pre-check lane, they're also observing you. And there's a lot of data that can be collected that is very useful for them to understand the pre-check versus the non-pre-check passengers.
So you're getting observed no matter what, so you might as well get through security faster if you're getting observed no matter what. I think that's what you're saying here. Yeah, okay.
If you're just joining our
Thank you. If you're just joining our conversation, we are talking with an aviation security expert about long lines at TSA, about how and why ICE agents are being deployed to airports where there are long lines. And we want to know what questions you have and whether you've flown recently and noticed any changes at TSA checkpoints. Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. You can also leave a comment if you're watching our show on YouTube or Facebook, and we will respond to it on the air. Roberta in Minneapolis has been waiting. Roberta, what do you want to share with us?
Hi, thanks so much. Thanks for taking my call. So just mainly a couple of comments, although a question did occur to me while I was waiting. I mean, it is so clear that DHS and the federal government is looking for work for their bloated staff, overpaid, ill-trained staff, and they don't, who have really no place, acting as if they know how to operate. Well, because they know how to operate X-ray machines or pat down passengers. It's ridiculous and insulting, as the previous caller noted, to the TSA workers who are working without pay. And I mean, so the question that occurred to me is, why isn't the brand new DHS head, Senator Mullen, being called to Congress right now to account for the rationale, to give a rationale for ICE troops now in public airports, making things worse when their colleagues really under the DHS umbrella, TSA workers, are not even getting paid. And he should be having to account for that. And he should also be part of the blocking the reopening of the government should be that DHS restructures how they pay everybody under their umbrella in an emergency situation like this.
Well, thank you, Roberta. You raised some really good points, Roberta. Obviously, Sheldon, I think people in the Twin Cities particularly are very sensitive to ICE agents being at airports, having just experienced a pretty intense immigration enforcement crackdown here. But I mean, do you think that that the new DHS secretary has a responsibility here to explain what they're doing? And my understanding is that these agents were deployed after the president sort of offhand said we should send ICE agents to the airports to help out.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that many of these agencies, including the TSA, are required to have a Senate-approved administrator. And that has not happened under the current administration. The TSA has someone who's acting in that role, but has not been Senate approved. And I think that's important that these positions are vetted by the Senate. For the reason is it gives the opportunity for the lawmakers to ask questions, but also for the public to hear the priorities and what they're trying to achieve. The last TSA administrator who was Senate approved was David Pekoski, great fellow. I've met him many times, talked with him, been in his office, and he had a good sense of what it took to shape, reshape, and operate the TSA. He was actually put in place by the president during his first administration, and he lived right through the Biden administration, and then he was fired at the beginning of the current Trump administration. That is critical, and the new DHS secretary should be putting that forward so that the vetting process will be much more informative for the public.
Again, if you're just tuning in, we are talking with an aviation security expert about long TSA lines at the airport. If you're a TSA worker and you're listening, we'd love to hear from you. We want to know how your day went and how the latest funding freeze has made you think about your job these days. And if you've flown recently and noticed any changes at TSA checkpoints, give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. So going back to the evolution of these security lines, Sheldon, how easy or how have some of these threats evolved since 9/11, and how does TSA keep up on what might be a new threat and how to manage it?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of communication and coordination across the world when it comes to airport security. The United States has typically been the poster child for a lot of the advances, but it doesn't mean that in the UK, in Europe, in Asia, people aren't doing things. I think we do it more rigorously, and we also do it in a manner that really sets the standard for so many other airports. But every time a new threat emerges, whether it's a liquid explosive, a bomb in a shoe, the underwear bomber, then there's a response. How are we going to deal with this? Often, a lot of companies create technologies that are going to be the new and improved technology, and they want to sell their product, obviously. Some of them are very good. A lot of them are pedestrian. And as a result of that, the TSA doesn't want to necessarily make the investment because it does cost money. And when you're talking about over 400 airports that you're going to deploy technologies and equipment for, it is a very, very expensive endeavor. So you want to be careful of where you make your investments, how you're bringing the risk down in an appropriate way. And we use the term buying down risk. And it's a term that you don't hear very often, but it's one that within the aviation security circles we talk about a lot. How can we buy down risk in a cost-effective way? So these are all discussions, and the TSA people, and these aren't the officers at the airport, but the people in Washington, the researchers, the people who set the policies. These people are dedicated professionals with their eye on the ball. They want to make sure that they're developing and deploying the best product possible for the traveling public.
And going back to some of the biometric information that products like Clear and TSA PreCheck require, obviously I can imagine some people are skeptical of giving that information over. They don't have to. It's obviously voluntary. Mm-hmm. But there are also some concerns, particularly raised by the ACLU, that, these are decisions based on religious and racial profiling, like who gets approved and who doesn't. I mean, how do you respond to some of those criticisms?
Well, the approval to be in TSA PreCheck, the criteria are very clear. So it has nothing to do with race or anything along those lines. It is purely based on the risk profile, not the racial profile, not the gender profile, not what country you were born in. It's purely your risk profile. And if you qualify, you're going to get it. So that's not even an issue. It's something when we talk about, and I'll talk about facial recognition because I think it's one which is really on the hot seat right now because of all the use of it for surveillance. The TSA doesn't want to use it for surveillance. ICE may be using it for surveillance, but the TSA, there's no value for it. What it's used for is to authenticate who you are. If you look way into the future on airport security, it's possible that one day, not today, not next week, next month, or next year, but one day there will be some people, the only screening they're going to get is highly reliable biometric identity authentication. That's all they're going to get. And they're just going to walk to their plane just because of that. It's not for everybody, but there is a way to validate your identity so well that you won't need any physical screening. That is the future of airport security.
And how do they assess a risk profile? I mean, what specifically are they actually looking for?
Well, they look historically at people who have tried to harm the air system and inflict damage to it. And as a result, you build these profiles of people. Some of it is very, very difficult. But the key, and this is the key point with TSA PreCheck, is when you voluntarily are willing to give your information, even though it's not that much information, the very fact that you're willing to show yourself to the TSA means that you inherently are less risky than the person who wants to hide themselves. So in other words, if you look at the most aggressive terrorist, their greatest asset is their anonymity, that they don't reveal who they are. And when people are willing to reveal a little bit about themselves, it brings down their risk quite precipitously.
And when you're looking at other sort of data-driven solutions here, what do you see on the horizon? Like when I do clear, I have to put my face up to a screen and it sort of looks at my eyes, and determines that I am who I am. I mean, what might people expect in 10 or 20 years here?
Well, artificial intelligence continues to evolve. I mean, after ChatGPT was introduced and these large language models for generative AI became almost commonplace, that we use them so routinely now, people think, oh, gee, we've arrived. Actually, we're still in the beginning. We're in the nascent stage of development of artificial intelligence. And the future is if we could imagine it, it wouldn't be far enough out. So I don't know what the future is going to be, but I do know that biometrics is an important critical component for aviation security in general and airport security in particular. And how that transforms it, we've talked about this in meetings and discussions. I think it's still too early to know for sure.
We had Alec in St. James who called in, but then his call dropped, but I'll read what he was going to ask. I recently came through Paris, going through customs. I noticed that I've been pulled aside for advanced screenings more and more often. It's changed from previous years. So are those screenings happening more frequently on international flights? I mean, what do you make of Alec's experience here?
Certainly a greater concern and care is associated with international flights because they typically are much longer. Planes with a lot more people, airplanes with a lot more fuel on them because they're going such a long distance. So there are certain protocols in place for international flights versus domestic. It doesn't mean that it's easier on domestic to get through rather than international. The standards are still there. But I've been randomly selected on an international flight several years ago for additional screening. And I knew that I was perfectly benign, but they had to verify that. And they asked me questions, did extra screening on me, on my physical, and that's fine. I mean, I was just randomly selected. And sometimes you're one of the lucky people that gets randomly selected more often than you think you should. But once again, these are the protocols in place. If you make the operation so predictable that the bad actors can predict it, then you've weakened the air system tremendously.
And the same, I feel like I see more dogs at airports too. Obviously that's not entirely replacing the system. But should people feel pretty confident that screening is happening well when dogs are involved and sniffing out, what people have in their bags?
Yeah, they're sniffing for explosive residue, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that, once again, is another layer of security. We're talking about these multiple layers across the entire airport security and aviation security system. And it's just another layer, and it adds more security. There may be some intelligence that there's some risk in a certain area on certain flights, and they may bring out some dogs, and it just adds a little more protection. When I see the dogs, I'm more confident that they're taking their job seriously.
And dogs are nice to see at the airports. It's a delight.
Of course.
So, there's that too. I want to get to a couple of comments that have come in online before we have to wrap up here. On YouTube, someone wrote, I traveled back from Phoenix on Monday. ICE was there to tell you what to put in the bins. Probably it was the only thing they could do with little training. It was insulting to see them there. TSA did the important things and the process was pretty fast. I mean, Sheldon, I think that gets back to what we were talking about earlier, which is ICE doesn't have training to actually do a lot of the jobs that are necessary to do TSA security well. And then, on Facebook here, someone wrote, why are people still working without pay? I know they need a job. They've been there a long time. But what guarantee is there that they will get their money? That is a good question, Sheldon. I mean, how do we know that these TSA agents will eventually get paid? I mean, we know the shutdown will end somehow, but is there any guarantee that they'll get everything that they're owed?
And the answer is yes, because it's law. A law was passed several years ago, and they are guaranteed to get paid. So that is not an issue at all. They are going to get paid, guaranteed.
Yeah. Okay. We just have a little bit of time left, but I'm hoping you could maybe speak to people who might be traveling tomorrow or sometime soon. Just, what advice might you give to folks who are concerned about these longer lines to plan for their trip appropriately?
Sure. One thing is you want to avoid secondary screening, which means that you get an alarm in your bag or when you're going through a full body scanner. When you start to pack for your trip, the first thing you want to do is unpack your bag. Make it completely empty so that you don't forget something that you had taken on a road trip. Now it's in your bag. On a road trip, it's benign. At the airport, it becomes a threat item. Just empty your bag and start from scratch every time. If you do that, you're going to find you're going to get through with less risk of secondary screening, because that's where most of the delays are happening, when there's secondary screening. Don't be part of the secondary screening group. Just go through your primary screening and you may find you're going to get through a little quicker.
Okay, great. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank our guest. Sheldon H. Jacobson is a professor of computer science at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He is a data scientist who's worked on aviation security for 30 years. He also helped develop the TSA PreCheck program. Sheldon, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
This conversation was produced by Carrie Dwyer. Thanks for tuning in. Join us again next Monday at 8.
Support for tonight's program comes from